Okay, hello. Is the microphone on? 1, 2, yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Sebastien, and I'm going to spend the next hour and a half, talking about what's happening in the IT world and what is changing around us, and how that makes us needing to change faster. Before I start that, I have to explain the unicorn. I work with Rob Ashton. Some of you may know from Twitter and other great projects he works on, like RavenDB, or worked on. And we have an argument. He likes ponies from My Little Pony, the TV show. And this is Princess Celestia. And she has a horn, which makes her a unicorn. I say it's a unicorn, he says it's a pony. So he has ponies on his desktop background, and I have a unicorn. There you go. So that was the explanation for the background. Before we proceed, I tend to speak very fast. I'm going to try and slow myself down a little bit, but whenever I go too quickly, make a sign towards me. Don't make it rude. At least for the beginning of the presentation. Don't throw things at me because it hurts the laptop most of the time. So this is not going to have any demos. This is going to have very few things to do with .NET or Microsoft. Surprising, I know. But we're going to be talking about the IT world. Before we start, if you want to chat with me, here's my details. The most important one is my Twitter account. If you want to talk to me, it's probably through Twitter. I very rarely answer anything else. When I started my development career, like I assume a lot of you, I was a young child deciding on my first computer, my first real computer. And I was in the landscape of Windows 3 and the landscape of deciding between a PC and a Mac. That's the first step I took in choosing a development platform before I knew what a development platform was. And at the time, I don't know if you remember, actually I assume some of you were not even born back then, which is frightening. There were new Macs that came with an Intel chip inside them, so you could run both Mac operating system and Windows for only 3 times the price of a PC. So I went for the PC, and I started working on PCs, and I started coding seriously using Visual Basic. I know, don't throw rocks at me just yet. I did move to C# in 2000 when the first early betas arrived. But the landscape has changed tremendously since the first version of .NET arrived in that single little envelope for Microsoft with an NGWS logo or whatever it was at the time, when we had only the compilers and the first alpha, beta, whatever it was, version of .NET. Apple was dead. Some people say that Apple is still dying. The only thing that has died in Apple so far has been Steve Jobs, sadly. But I think it's interesting to look at the market share of Apple. Now, a lot of people will tell you that the market share has not changed very much. That is true. They still have about 8% of that pie. I think they've variated between 3 and 8 in the last 20 years. However, the market is much bigger than it was. Many more people are using Apple devices. How many of you have Mac laptops? Okay, yeah, that's about the average. The more north you go, I find, the more Apple devices you find, which I think may be related to the salaries Norwegians have. We have more and more Mac laptops. What does that mean for our development environment? Well, it means that my mom doesn't buy PCs anymore. And that's important for me because there's a lot of applications that I build that are going to be used by my mom. And that means I suddenly have a platform that is used by all the moms and all the rich people that pay a lot of money for applications are using a platform I can't code in. And that proportion is rising because I think there are more Apple laptops in the last quarter being sold than there were any other PC line from any other constructor. So that trend continues happening. Apple is still happening, and it's not interesting because it's Apple, it's interesting because it's not Windows. That means that all the knowledge that we've invested in .NET out of the box didn't work. And that keeps on changing. Then we had these little babies, the smartphone revolution. Let's see on the desks. Can you show me your Apple iPhones and just your Apple iPhones? Come on, don't be shy, don't lie. Okay, there's a couple. How many of you have a Nokia Lumia? 2, 3, 4. How many Galaxies? Yeah, there you go. Plenty of hands goes up. Now, you are not representative of the market very much, but not too bad. Right? That's the shipments for mobile devices. So first, mobile devices, we've been able to develop on them since Microsoft released Windows Mobile, that was called Windows CE. We even had .NET running on that. Anyone built projects with the compact framework? Yeah, so we've had those very slow, unusable, user-friendly devices that we could build .NET applications for. They existed, but they never went through in the market. So our development platform, us .NET developers, was still very, very tiny. Now in the enterprise space, it may have worked, but it didn't grow very quickly. Since Apple has released the iPhone, again, my mum is using an iPhone. I swear it has nothing to do with me, and I'm not selling you Apple shares. My mum has an iPhone, and the next phone will probably be a Samsung one if the market share predictions are accurate. The two main leaders on the platforms are not Microsoft. Where is Microsoft right now on Windows Phone? Quite lagging behind. Where can we use our .NET skills on those platforms? Very difficult. By the way, when you have comments or you want to disagree with me, do it in real time. That way we won't have questions. We can fight it out, and that'll make for great content, and we'll do a YouTube video and get rich. So we can buy Samsungs and iPhones. So then we have the bigger versions of this. We've got the tablets. And the same thing, as you can see here, sadly, we still don't have .NET products on that. This is the current market, and we have 68% of iPads of some sort, and we have around 30% of Android. Now, why am I showing you all those numbers? Is because we are not in there. We are not in there. We do have transitioning tools we can use to run .NET on those devices, but this is not the native way of building the app. When there's a new release of the operating system, you rely on those guys to go and implement the features and expose them. How many of you have used any of the Xamarin products to do mobile? A couple of you? Right. If you've done development with those platforms, you will know that sometimes stuff is just not implemented. And when you hit that bug and you have to go towards production, and you had a production line, and now you are depending on the production of those frameworks that wrap everything for .NET, it becomes very complicated. You're losing a competitive advantage because you are not able to control your own release dates. That's a problem. And I'm telling you that because I helped deliver a project that was on iPads. Like I'm sure most of you have on the stack of projects coming up, has to have iPad Compact. It has to have the logo. Doesn't matter how you build it or what it looks like, as long as it's compatible with iPad. And we started using MonoTouch, and we had some issues. The Xamarin guys are great. They answer very quickly, and they help you as much as they can. They really are very quick at doing it. But you are still not on a native platform. That also has another thing with it, associated with it. We thought Java on the client was nearly dead, and it's coming back through Android. So I don't know what to think about that one. But it also means Objective-C, and all the macOS toolings are growing to more and more developers. How many of you do interviews, job interviews for your colleagues, your future colleagues? Only that? Get out of here. 2 people. 2 people are interviewing their future colleagues. Well, that means that you're going to have more and more developers that come from a background that doesn't involve any Microsoft language. We have more and more developers that have experience with Objective-C. Have you read Objective-C? I'm sure I find it about as readable as Perl. Now, frightening question, how many of you don't know about Perl? So the landscape is changing a lot, and we're not in it. Now, Microsoft is doing amazing things with Windows 8, as you already know. You've seen all the demos of Microsoft Surface tablets, and we'll have a great new environment, WinRT, which is not going to be, which is essentially a different version of the .NET Framework libraries. Not the same. So we've got the .NET Framework skills. We're going to have to relearn the WinRT skills, which are slightly different. And we have all these skills that we may need to know when we deliver our project, because at the last time we're going to have to learn Objective-C to do a native shell. So we've got a transitioning technology for that, right, to support all those devices. When Netscape was still alive, a long time ago, they said the web browser will be the desktop of the future. That was Netscape 4. Who remembers Netscape 4? Yeah, a few hands. How many of you arrived on the internet after Netscape 4? Before Netscape 4? Didn't arrive, are still not on the web? That's the rest of the room. Okay, so for you that were not there, Netscape had this idea that they'll be able to overpower Microsoft and kill the desktop domination they had on people by having a browser support all the functionality that a computer does. Then they got killed because they told Microsoft that. And they went bankrupt. So we got Firefox out of it after 17 years of development. But that vision is finally being realized by HTML5. We had a whole length of time where the browser war was over. And that made the news in ZDNet and all that stuff in, what was it, early 2000s? And 98, 2000? And the browser war was over, which means that no new features were added to the browser for many, many years. And why we suffer still Internet Explorer 6 existing, which makes for great debugging sessions at night the day you want to release your product and you discover that final bug. Everybody has seen that? Yeah, another skill that will disappear, I hope. So HTML5 is the new set of technologies. It's not one specification, it's plenty of specifications. Most of them are not finished. Most of them are unstable, most of them are half implemented, and most browsers are incompatible with each other, which, slide is in the wrong place, which is why the expected completion is 2022 for HTML5. That's from an interview from the editor of the spec as a schedule he proposed for HTML5. It is not far from the truth if you consider all the HTML5 technologies that we're learning very, very quickly. We have a new markup language. The markup we were fine with. It was easy. There's just a bunch of new HTML tags to make your presentation more UI-friendly and more self-descriptive. But then there's all the JavaScript lands that goes with it. There's many various APIs to be able to install applications on your mobile device. What's it called? The apps? App cache. The app cache. Great technology that is horrible to build with. Again, something that we released recently with a customer. So those technologies are coming, and there's a huge amount of them, and there's all the knowledge that you thought you didn't want to learn again after IE6 that you're going to have to relearn with the new browsers. So how many of you have started delivering HTML5 applications? Okay, what APIs are you using in there? What? Which parts of the spec? Like is it the new tags that you're using? Is it the? The Canvas API, yes. Canvas API, SVG support, offline access, database, webcams, plenty of new APIs. Each of them, of course, incompatible with each other until they've been standardized. So the promise of a unified platform that we can build once and run everywhere, not been delivered by Java, still not being delivered by HTML5 just yet. But I think it's very, very interesting to look at the stats that we have for web browsers now. Because if you remember the end of the browser war, when your stats showed 80–90% of Internet Explorer, life was simple. And now life is very complicated because your testing time is becoming bigger and bigger. And the testing skills that we've had in our teams need to be much better now. We need to be much more specific about testing, much more thorough. Because without testing, you will not be compatible across 4 browsers. And we remember the websites that said designed for Internet Explorer. Please upgrade your browser. I don't think we want to go back to that. So we have to test for new browsers. We have to acquire those skills because it is not possible to do all this testing manually unless you have a lot of very cheap testers. If you can send me the address where I can get those, I'd like to have that. So we have much more diversity with much more different browsers, and each browser platform is developed independently. So APIs that are supported on Chrome will not be supported in Firefox, will not be in Internet Explorer 10. That means 3 different development platforms you have to learn on top of all the previous ones. There's another revolution that those devices are bringing us, and that's the App Store. The App Stores, I should say. As you may know, there's trademark fights, well, there was trademark fights between Apple and Microsoft over the name App Store. Just an interesting tidbit. Your application is now going to be deployed to devices in a completely different way. We are changing the landscape of native application development completely. We were used to difficult, hard to maintain, MSI-driven installations on Windows. Basically, you didn't want to redeploy your app. You wanted to build it once and not redeploy. And what I've seen, again, all this I'm talking about is just built on what I've seen my clients do. They've adopted Silverlight very quickly, all of them. Why? Because of the deployment story, not the development, not the browser. They don't care about the browser very much. That's why the out-of-browser Silverlight experience was asked so much. It was because of the deployment story. With the app stores coming on devices, your deployment story is the same one. You can finally release your application more often. What does that mean? We'll have yet another skill that we may not have in our teams that we need to rethink. And it's the one of release management. We need to stay competitive to release more often, and to release more often without breaking our user base. Because if you automate the update of your application to 5 million customers, and none of them can access their account anymore, you have a much bigger problem than you used to before. There's also side problems with app stores. We are giving control back to the vendors on what is acceptable on the devices that we built for. Now, they can try to be as open as they can, they're still in control. And the rules are only as specific as wording can be specific on a website. We have had problems with app stores, with the application being refused, an application that accessed a website. We can't change the website that the application accesses. We do whitelisting, so we do access control based on the IP. When the application gets validated, we can't give them access, so the app gets refused. So nothing works.
But who wants to pay 30% or even more of the price to the App Store? So, for example, to Apple or Google or Microsoft?
Do you want to give 30%? Well, it's not the same percentages between Apple and Microsoft. Maybe competition will help drive the cost down. Who would you pay for? I don't know. How evil do you consider each of those companies? Apple, Microsoft, Google. Which one is more evil? Well, it depends what we're talking about. I would simply say that from a business perspective, I'd rather give 30% of $1 million than 0% of $5, right? So if I manage to go mass market, I will manage to go mass markets because I have a lot of customers. And those customers are very easy to reach on the App Store. They're not so easy to reach without the App Store. How many of you are still doing client development? Because maybe I'm just talking to web developers and you're all bored of your tits right now. Yeah? So there's still a few app developers, a lot of web developers. Now, as you know, there's also another problem with all this crazy App Store stuff. It doesn't work with HTML applications. You can't just put in the App Store a website and get money for access. Can anyone suggest me a reason why Microsoft and Apple wouldn't let you just point an HTML5 application in the App Store and start collecting money? No? I don't know. I'm not going to answer that one. Just going to leave it hanging in your head. Interesting that the open way of building web applications for all devices is not available on the app stores that are making money for you to pay for the development of that website. Might have something to do with vendor lock-in, but I'm sure no vendor would want to do that, ever. So, yeah, which one is more evil in these cases? I'm not entirely sure. So we've got, just on the client side, a new App Store model. We have new platforms that we need to learn. And I've not even started talking about the server. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening on the server side. Because on the client side, well, actually, let's just ask a few more questions that are a bit directed. Who's still using WPF? Oh, I feel sorry for you. How about Silverlight? Yeah, oh, really? Only two? 2 people are still using Silverlight. Right, so WPF is not really being, I don't know how you call it. Is it being maintained, or they're just redoing the makeup on a corpse on a regular basis? What is for sure is that WinRT is what the upgrade path between WPF and Silverlight ended up being, right? Which means that WinRT is in our future, WPF is in our past, and your app is going to be not so compatible in the future. Those technologies like Flash is dying as well. Anyone still using Flash? Anyone rebuilding websites very quickly to remove Flash? Yeah, so again, all that is being driven by those market shares, by these, by the changing market share of all those devices. There is one number which I forgot to put in there. The 66% of mobile content goes to an iPad. And I didn't find the percentage of mobile browsers. Actually, no, I did. 7% or 8% of the traffic from Wikimedia, so all the stuff that gives images and videos from Wikipedia, comes from iOS devices. Just that, 7% of one of the biggest websites. There's a huge amount of mobile devices out there. All the custom technologies like Silverlight, Flash, and WPF on the client are going away. And the replacements are not necessarily very good. So we've got a lot of skills that we learned over the last 10 years that we need to get rid of. And that's on the client side. On the server side, to deliver all that content, we've got a few options. That's also current trends and statistics. And what I've seen happen with my clients in the last couple of years is a shift. Now, those numbers, when we were a .NET developer, we were staying in the .NET developer blue line. We didn't talk to the other guys. First, there was probably no other guys in another technology stack. We're a Microsoft shop, so we use Microsoft technologies. And second, if they had them, they were probably in another building. probably to avoid fight between which one is better, Java or C#. Thankfully, history showed us that it was C#, I think. Anyone loves Java, wants to fight it out? No? Didn't think so. And there's a massive shift with my clients. More and more clients are starting to have multiple stacks running. They have .NET code, of course they've got .NET code, but they realize that .NET, or ASP.NET here, for websites, is not the only platform. You know the guys that know that the best are the Windows division. Have you noticed that in the last 2 years, 3 years, Microsoft has been spending a lot of money making sure that PHP runs well on Windows, and that Node.js runs well on Windows. I wonder if they spend any money to make sure ASP.NET runs well on Windows, but that would be really cool too. And it already runs great on Windows. It just doesn't run anywhere else, so they don't have to spend money. But you have all those other technologies. Cold Fusion is a funny one. Did you know that Cold Fusion market is actually growing? It's very interesting. Very interesting. But we have more and more of these interactions with these technologies. So as developers, we are faced with a choice like we were before. Are you a front-end developer? If you're a front-end developer, you will do no back-end work. Because writing web services, if you write HTML pages, is impossible for your little brains. Right? It's not possible. Are you an HTML developer or a Silverlight developer? Fight it out. I don't know. I want to write SOAP services. Those technologies are being most and most cross-pollinated. That means that a lot of the cool stuff about Ruby is being absorbed, some people would say copied, on other platforms. A lot of ideas that come from one language, like generics, end up in another language, like whatever ended up in Java. Dynamic languages made the dynamic keyword possible in C#. Would that feature exist in C# without the other technology? No, it wouldn't. And I think it's because more and more clients have more and more multiple stacks. And that means that us as developers are starting to become polyglots. We're starting to have to learn multiple languages and be able to look at the documentation on a platform we don't know and learn it. But a language is not very complicated to learn, is it? How many of you write JavaScript? Right. It's the most awkward language in the world, I think. It's a crazy language. It was designed in 10 days to prevent something worse from being released. Or, according to other sources, because they spent, or they got some money from Sun to reuse the Java brand for an undisclosed sum of money. Rumors from the internet. You can go and check yourself. So it's a strange language, yet everybody has learnt it. When I tell you that you should know about Ruby and Python and all the other languages, you will tell me, no, I'm a .NET developer. I know C#. But you know JavaScript as well, you have to. And you probably know other languages that you're not telling anyone. Like how I started with VB and I don't tell anyone. But I'm a consultant, so if I say I started with VB, I'll probably get less money. So no, I started with C#. I didn't know anything before. We have more and more technologies, and they cross-spread a lot of dynamic features. And it's not just the language. We're doing the same thing with frameworks as well. Web frameworks are much more diverse than they were. We started with ASP on Windows, and funnily enough, that was JavaScript back in '98. Anyone doing active server pages when it was literally the % tag with a lot of JavaScript in there? Or VB script? Anyone remembers VB script? And web frameworks have exploded in recent years on .NET. We have plenty of new different frameworks. And I'm also seeing a change in attitude in my clients. It used to be we are standardized on one developer framework. Because again, my developers do not have the time or the bandwidth intellectually to learn 2 APIs. And we go back to, do you want to know about the system.io API or the system.web? Not both. So we had ASP.NET, and that was it for many years on .NET. Then we had MVC appear, a great new model copied from Monorail, an open source product. Great inspiration. And then we've had Fubu, that's approaching version 1 very soon. Very compositional, completely new way of building web applications. Great framework that's been under active development for a long time. You have Nancy. Anyone using Nancy here? Yeah, 3 people, 4 people. Great framework to build web apps. OpenRaster, anyone still using that? No? Yeah. I don't use it either anymore. I just wrote this stuff, I don't need to use it. OpenRaster, which was also the very, very strong inspiration for web APIs. I'll have a little bit of discussion about inspiration in a little bit. And simple.web. Anyone using simple.web? No? New web framework that you can go and check online that uses a lot of niceties in .NET 4 from Mark Randall. We've got more and more of those web frameworks, and what is changing around us is that clients are starting to accept having multiple frameworks. My current client has MVC, Web API, OpenRaster, and Node.js. And that's a Microsoft shop, pure Microsoft shop. Technically, they were a Java shop before, but they are a Microsoft shop these days. We have more of those web frameworks. That means that when you are switching from one project to the other, you are going to know more and more web frameworks that work completely differently. We're not only polyglot in the language or in the platform, we're turning into polyglots on the frameworks. That means that we need to find new ways of learning quickly. That also means if you start delving into those projects, that you can't rely on the MSDN documentation. And that's a new skill for a lot of us on .NET. How do you know how something works without a very lengthy technical discussion written by a professional technical writer? Reflector, if you want to go into the internals, yes, that is true. For Web API, you will have 60,000 lines of code to go and check. That is true. You can do that. I would think that we have a much better way for platforms that do use that amazing architectural style of development called tests. Right? The testing is important to show how things are being built. We're not used to that on .NET. We're not used to doing self-documenting code, and we're even less used to do test-driven code, where the test shows you how to use stuff. I know I didn't do it for OpenRaster, so parts of it are a mess. But they were never documented, so no one went through Reflector to go and see how it works. So everything has been quite fine. So we've got more and more diversity on the web frameworks as well, and it doesn't stop there. Now, we've had multiple languages, multiple platforms to deal with, multiple frameworks. At least SQL Server was stable and not going anywhere, mostly because it cost a fortune to install to start with. And that's the next change that is moving everything around in our understanding of how we build software. The transactional store, the way to use the relational, or the fact that we use the relational model is not required anymore. Clients are finally opening up to the idea that not everything is tables. Crazy stuff. So I wanted to chat a little bit about the stuff that I've seen used recently by clients very successfully in, again, shops that wanted only SQL Server before. When I talk about NoSQL, I talk about a whole bunch of different type of databases. I'm just going to talk about 3 very quickly because they're the ones that you will hear the most about. And a NoSQL store is, so the definition on Wikipedia says something along the lines of, it may or may not have asset properties, atomicity, consistency, etc. And it may not, and probably will not, have a unified query language. Because as we all know, all SQL products share the same query language. No? ANSI SQL? Well, theoretically they should. Side note, but there you go. We've got the key value stores. Key value stores are actually very powerful because the majority of things we do, especially web developers, is based on the idea of keys and then blobs of data that we throw back to the user. Now, a typical key value store would be the file system. I have a file name. When you open the file name, you get bytes. It's a revolutionary concept, right? Now, when you do your query to get your user object and check the password, you don't actually need anything except the user ID, right? What prevents us from using a file system to store that? I don't know, open-ended question. Most of what we build is easy enough to use in a key value store because I just need keys to retrieve most of the time. And if I can do that 5 times quicker, I'll be fine. I don't query very much. I don't query very often the majority of my data. And key value stores are based on this concept. And I've seen clients accept using the file system as the main storage for certain products, which is cool because the file system is simple. I can debug the file system using the Key Value Store Enterprise Manager, aka File Explorer. Simple is wonderful for those systems. A caching system where cache can be invalidated or flushed, I don't need to create a delete command. I have the delete command, it's the file system. If I need to fix some data, I can open it in Notepad. Crazy stuff. So complicated. Right, you have real key value store systems that provide everything that you need for a real system, for very large systems, distribution. Yes?
Can you explain us a scenario where you would use the key value store, or to see the whole picture around that?
User profiles.
Okay, after logging in?
Hmm?
After logging in, because I have username and password, or email address and password?
Username and password, store it on text files. Do encrypt the password. Do encrypt the password. But I mean, I don't need the store to understand the structure of my data. I need in my application to understand the structure of the data. But the store itself doesn't care. It doesn't need to care because it doesn't need to understand it to be able to do the query. The query is select top 1 where ID equal. How many of our queries look like that? Well, we just select based on the ID. Then retrieve something, go and get what we want, make a check on the password and go and update. Right? We don't necessarily need it. So all the scenarios around these systems only require a key. Most of the system I'm currently building right now is, how can I describe it without being descriptive enough to get in trouble? We're keeping a list of things that you can add and remove and update, and they don't have a schema, or rather they have a variable schema. I may have 3 fields in one, I may have 5 fields in the other, and they may not even be the same ones. And then we have authorization on top of that understand that content, but the rest of the system doesn't really care about the schema at all. So the only thing we really care for these things are the ID. Right? The simplest kind of those documents is a hypermedia store, which you can build from a key value store. Hypermedia store, very complicated term. You can throw it to someone at your next technical conversation. It's any key value store that uses a URL as the ID. Right? It's a web server. That's all. Hypermedia store. web server. So, yeah, key value store, very simple, but yes, there's no querying. There's no querying system. How do you build systems with having only access to the primary keys and without having the queries? Well, there's plenty of ways to build systems like that. You transform the data when you create it, right? So if you do an aggregate for a query, instead of running the query on the data, when the data arrives, you write another object with another ID that has the aggregated data, if you know all this stuff in advance. Doesn't solve all scenarios, but you can go very far with just a system like that. Of course, I'm sure you know by now about document stores, mostly because most of you read Allende's blog. And we've had a lovely document store being built in .NET. So a document store can still let you access things like by ID, like a key value store. But the definition says it's for storing, retrieving, and managing documented-oriented information. So we take a key value store, and now we give it a little bit of knowledge about how the content itself is structured. It still doesn't have a fixed schema, still variable, but suddenly you can start having relationships again and having queries again. But of course, they have less performance than key value stores. So you give a little bit to take a little bit. How many of you use that kind of, how many of you have used Raven? 4, how was it? Good? Okay. So it's just, okay. We'll just cut that off at the end. I'm joking, we're not cutting off anything. So it's semi-structured data. In RavenDB, you can take a JSON document and you can start persisting it at random IDs and make links between them and create queries and query the documents, and all of this works in JSON. Now, JSON is great. That does mean that compared to a key value store, I can't store easily as my main document format a Word document. Don't ask me why you would want to do that, but I know people that do that. Actually, I built a system that did that. So document stores provide us with semi-structured data, which allows us to do things like MapReduce implementations much more easily. I'm not going to go into the details because I'm sure you'll have other people tell you about all the things you can do with these documents, probably last night at the party and this evening after the discussion. I keep on seeing the time in London and thinking it's only 9 o'clock. Graph databases, they're my favorites, and that's something that I've also started employing. Please go and learn about them. They're really cool. A graph database is not modeled on semi-structured data. It's modeled on relationship between documents. So document A is a Word document. Document B is me. I am the author of document A. And we have a relationship because I'm the author. It sounds very complicated, but you've been using that kind of system for a long time. Who of you is using CSS? It's a trick question, is to see who can be bothered raising their hands. CSS, you link them with a link tag. What's the other attributes you've got on that link tag? The rel attribute for relationship. So you already know how to do a relationship between two documents. One of them is an HTML page, the other one is a CSS page. So graph databases do that and model that for your data. And data is very often highly connected. There's a lot of relationship between an order detail and an order and a stock item and a cart and a user. Those become very richly connected graphs. There's plenty of products also to do graph databases. Not written in .NET, but as I said before, our clients are turning more and more multi-platform. So it doesn't really matter as much.
But there is a graph database that is written in
Hmm?
Solar.net.
Solar.net?
A German shop.
Okay.
There's also an open source license.
There's an open source license for that.
Yeah, but the enterprise license is about 40,000 euro per server per year.
Yeah, but if you need, I'm not the right one to discuss licensing, or what I think of licensing costs for open source products. But the argument that, I hope I won't misrepresent it, but Udi Dahan made a very good argument. When you need to pay for the enterprise license, you probably have the money to pay for it. It's a chicken and egg problem. I don't know where I sit on that one, but I do know how much it costs to deploy SQL Server. And I do know the cost of the massive servers that we need to keep in some of our clients. The licensing cost at that point is nothing. If I don't have to buy the amount of infrastructure I have to buy in SQL Server, that pays for itself. So your mileage may vary. These systems are very different from SQL because they will allow you to do very different things than the relational model. And by allowing you to do that, they're going to reduce some other costs somewhere else. So a typical installation that costs $15 million is now only going to cost half of that. At that point, $40,000 is a drop in the ocean. But indeed, most of those databases have open source implementations. Microsoft even has a non-relational system in their future SQL Server. Was it called a column-based something? I don't know, check their documentation. So even Microsoft is doing it in SQL Server. SQL Server has no SQL features. The world is turning crazy. But it has very different performance numbers for what people use it for. Go and check the website. I don't actually know how it works. I heard it in the corridor. It's true. Right. Another one you would have heard of, and that's a very, very powerful system, is the systems are built around event stores. So it's a bit of an extension on the key value store. You just add a time component on it. And okay, let's restart that one. So you've got event stores. And event stores are using a time-based model. We take snapshots of, well, we aggregate all the information that comes through, and we take snapshots of the data at various points in time. That way we never lose anything. And we can rebuild the state of the world at any point in time whenever we want. Actually, yes, sorry. Just ignore the description on that slide. I obviously pressed Control-Z at the wrong point. So ignore that, listen to me. So event stores, there's going to be a great event store released very soon in open source by our good friend Greg. I'll let people do the announcements when they want. Plenty of, you know Greg, you had him last year here. So they're doing crazily interesting things around event stores and event-driven architecture. Just a couple of the kind of things I've seen my clients use that you need now to learn about. Oh, by the way, if you want to put CQRS and event stores, they go very well together. So go to Greg Young's website, you'll know everything about it, everything about event stores. We now need to learn beyond SQL. Each of those stores has its own query language. There's a couple of stores I'm not talking about. There are RDF stores for the semantic web with query languages like Sparkle. Sounds really good. Or sounds like a drag queen cabaret bar. I'm not sure. We need to learn all those new query languages. We need to learn about the new APIs because we will use those systems, be it that we like it or not, because they appear more and more in our systems. We need to learn new features of SQL Server that are not relational based. We need to rethink how our architectures are built. We are not building 3-tier architectures anymore. Neither should we have done it to start with, but that's another conversation for later. And even at the architectural level, things are changing too. We are more and more in an SOA world. We are more and more building systems that are built on completely different architectural styles. Once upon a time, we were supposed to build SOAP, and we would have distributed transactions, and we would have atomicity, and we would have the same development language, and we would have to learn nothing, and then it all failed. And we had the WS style specifications instead. SOAP still works in the enterprise, but new architectural styles to develop SOAP, to develop SOA are pushing forward. REST is finally making an appearance in enterprise systems. Some of you may know this is my favorite architectural style. This is where I spent a lot of time building hypermedia systems, link-driven systems, the web, building the web. The web is getting in the enterprise, and this is changing as well. That means that the skills that you will develop to build the big enterprise systems will be the same ones as you've been using for the enterprise, for the web. Event-driven architectures are growing, and service bus. Anyone using in service bus? Okay, well, service bus is an event-driven architecture, great system that lets you build even an event store if you wanted to, if you made a lot of effort, but lets you build applications that are message-based. So we don't go and query data, then update data. We receive messages. We have publications, subscribers, dynamically integrated with each other, with new nodes appearing and disappearing from your network dynamically. All these things are products that exist now that are being built at our clients. And I'm sure Udi will tell you that there's a lot of in-service bus installations in the wild. So you will encounter completely different architectures where your customer information is not stored in the same system as your orders, and where each system keeps data in different states. We have to learn about those new architectural styles. One of the last changes that I've seen a lot is that clients are starting to understand that tiers are not functioning and never have. That making changes across tiers is not a good idea because we end up doing vertical slices of horrible mess, and that this is costing us a fortune. So we're starting to componentize a little bit more, and that means that we need to start aggregating more bits and bobs from various parts of our systems, that systems become independent, and that software is finally getting componentized, which we've been promised since the 90s, right? So we're getting there slowly. And when I say slowly, this is the number of packages we have on NuGet. Who hasn't used NuGet? Yeah? Who hasn't used NuGet? 3 people. Right. Who's used OpenWrap? Just don't even answer. I won't ask. We have 51,000 packages that we can choose from. That means that our ecosystem is growing. We'll go back to what I was talking about with the application store. We have new release management as well for our code. That's what I've seen at my clients. My clients are starting to build applications that are built of independent modules. They're starting to understand that each of those modules can be built independently with their own versioning strategy, so you don't ship massive amounts of changes in one go. And that's because we have package managers to help us with this revolution. Are we faring well in the .NET world with those 51,000 packages? Well, you tell me. This is the GitHub stats by language. You'll see that C# is not in there, right? And you'll see, more importantly, that JavaScript is at the top of that list by far, far, far above the other implementations. So I'm going to go back to JavaScript because that's the closing point of what I want you to think about and to know that you're going to have to learn, because that's what this talk was about. What is it that we're going to have to learn in the next few weeks, months, to deliver our projects? JavaScript is the world's most misunderstood programming language that has become the most popular programming language. That's what I was saying earlier. It's an awkward language. However, it is now used on the client heavily. And we have a lot of new stuff being built in there. I've been fortunate to work with Rob Ashton on a lot of code that involves JavaScript in the last 2 months. And I can tell you that it is a lot of knowledge to gain when you have no previous knowledge at all. Package managers for JavaScript, that's an area to keep watching. That's going to come. How do I package components in JavaScript to make sure that I can actually release my website? Who's been using jQuery? Okay, so you're going to understand what unmaintainable means. Right? When you have very, very long chains of initialization, everything slapped together, and you have no experience of JavaScript, so you don't exactly know how to architect all this stuff to make it look a little bit less horrible. It's very difficult to maintain JavaScript out of the box. There's new technologies coming in, and it's all forming now. So if you want to be part of all this stuff, you have to get in now when there's nothing to learn yet, so you can learn just as it grows. Don't leave it for 3 years, or you'll be left behind. JavaScript is growing so quickly that it's even starting to infect the server. And beyond the great logo they have, it's amazing to think that we had JavaScript on the server in 96, 97. When was ASP1 released? And in 2012, we're going back to it. Node.js, very interesting system. Go and learn about it because you're going to encounter systems with it. I'm building more and more Node stuff alongside .NET, not instead of .NET. They all have different advantages. The platforms have different advantages and different cost. Pick the right one. But this is certainly something that you want to learn about. And I'm not the only one to think about that, because according to Marie-Jo Follet, I think that's how it's pronounced, which is a well-known Microsoft expert, the word is that Anders, that's the guy that invented C#, is now working on the JavaScript tooling within Microsoft. So Microsoft is putting a lot of money on JavaScript as well. So all this movement is happening that we didn't have. I mean, for the last 12 years, I really only had to check new .NET releases. And suddenly I now have to deal with 5 different platforms, 12 different languages, 15 different frameworks. This is normal, natural, and people should not be afraid about it. Our environment is changing, our tools are changing, our languages are changing, and we need to start adapting to it much more quickly. I'm just going to stop on that word, because I think that's what the IT environment of today/tomorrow is going to be. It's all based on diversity, more platforms, more environments, more switching, and less tie-in. Now I'll take any questions if anyone has any.
What are your predictions for these languages like CoffeeScript or Dart and these abstracted from the JavaScript itself?
So what I'm...
Is it
yeah.
worth learning or?
So the question is it worth learning, and what are my predictions on languages that compile down to JavaScript, like Dart and CoffeeScript? First, I'm not going to do any prediction, because they're filming. And that's going to come back in 3 years and say, Sebastien was wrong. I like CoffeeScript for certain things. I use it for tests. That's the compromise we found with Rob. I think I would have an issue investing my time on Dart, because Google has done GWT before, and then moved all their developers from GWT to Dart, and are leaving GWT to die. So if they do that with Dart, then where do you stay? So it depends on how much longevity you want your company to have, and how much do you trust.
Basically, if JavaScript is so obvious,
Yes, you can do it. The ugliness really has two parts to it. One is the language itself. There's a few tiny noisy things like function declarations. Those ones, I personally, from experience, after 2 months of being in JavaScript world all the time, you don't see it anymore. It doesn't seem a problem anymore. It was the big blocking thing for me when I started doing a lot of JavaScript code, was how verbose the syntax was, and now I just don't even think about it. So the language flexibility means that you can write very, very bad code, but if you think about your code carefully, you end up writing much nicer code. So I wouldn't invest myself on the CoffeeScript compiler or the Dart compiler, because what I thought I had issues with JavaScript have gone away, mostly. The Google guys would disagree, because the JavaScript language refused to have classes, which is why they created Dart. So if you want class-based development, probably use Dart. How much do you trust Google to keep the project going? That's the question. But yes, in general, things are changing also at that level. Was it Douglas that said that JavaScript was the IL of the web? It's the assembler language of the web. And all those compilers are compiling down to JavaScript, and yes, you should use them where it makes sense. It's a consultant answer, right? It depends. I invest on CoffeeScript for my test. I wouldn't invest on CoffeeScript for my code, because I don't have the problems I had with JavaScript to start with.
Why do you invest for the testing?
Because rewriting my test on an existing product is less of an issue. I can afford, once my tests are written for correctness, I can afford to transition those more slowly than my production code once my production code doesn't go through rapid development anymore. So the lifetime that needs to be supported for is less expensive to correct. And because it makes the test much more readable for BDD style testing. Anyone else?
Well, can you explain what the most or main benefit of Node.js is? Well, why should I use it? It's something I always think about, but I just didn't find it out.
Well, that's a very good question. Why do you use SQL to start with?
Sorry?
Why do you use SQL to sorry. So the question was, what's the main benefit of using, or is there any benefit in using NoSQL over Node.js over .NET or over other platforms?
Yeah.
Two main benefits that I see. The first one is it is nice to run on an event loop because you're in a very quick single-threaded environment. Now, I know that Microsoft has invested a huge amount of money in having a great async implementation, but there is a difference between asynchronous and multi-threaded. .NET is a great .NET 4.5 is a great platform for multi-threaded asynchronous coding, where you have multiple things accessing the same collection at the same time. It makes the code very complicated in the things that are being accessed, because you need to synchronize all that data so that multiple threads can read. Node takes the other extreme, which is the kind of the JavaScript extreme. Let's keep things very simple and have only one thread. And then we'll do everything on one thread. And they get great I/O performance from that, which you can probably reach with .NET, but the level of complexity involved in building your application is much lower. So that's one part. The other part is JavaScript again. We get a huge amount of benefit in being able to run the same code on the client and on the server. So a typical example would be an open source package that I'm going to release in a little while, called Dominatrix. You know, I like cool names for my projects, so which is a templating, sort of a templating engine for JavaScript. And I can run that on the client, on the browser, or I can run that on the server side using exactly the same code and the same template language. If I was to build that both in .NET and JavaScript, I would double the amount of code I have to maintain. It's much easier to have the same code on both sides. Doesn't apply to everything. Not everything works on both sides, but for example, we run all of our testing for the latest project in Node.js. We use libraries like Cheerio that lets us have jQuery on the server side, which is great. I can load a chunk of HTML, make changes using a jQuery syntax, and boom, sending it in an HTML page straight to the client. So I don't have to have the little loading cursor when my app loads in the iPad, which is cool. There's a lot of benefits from that. Now, I will tell you a secret. Why do I prefer at the moment working on nodes than working on .NET? Is the open source community on Node is very mature compared to the .NET one. So there's less much reinventing of the wheel. It's kind of understood that if you have a problem with something, you will send a pull request, not a whiny issue message asking when it will be fixed. And you just have many more components that are very useful. Because the first reaction you have as soon as you finished an interesting piece of code in Node is to put it into a package and send it for other people to use. That habit doesn't exist yet on .NET very much. It's growing, it's getting there, but we're still very far from other communities in that respect. And that's a pleasure to work with. Because whenever I have an idea, I'm thinking, oh, I know something they've not done. Oh, no, they have. Go back to building actual real code. So that's the other advantage of Node. Anyone else? Okay, then I'll thank you for coming this morning. I think we should have someone else come to talk to you about something else that I'm not going to understand either. So thank you very much for your attention, and remember, do promote diversity because that's where we all headed towards. Thank you.